In this screencast, we will examine documentation comments, or doc comments, and how to process these comments into documentation in PDF and HTML formats. We'll also see how to post these materials on the web. So doc comments are just a particular way of writing comments, and we'll discuss two types: class comments and method comments. So consider this project for storing information about bicycles. So here's the bike class. In this case, a bike has an identifier, a name, and some number of gears. And this is an example of a class comment. It's documenting the class bike. And what makes this a doc comment is the presence of the slash and the 2 stars. Now this looks like a C-style block comment, but the 2 asterisks makes it a doc comment. And when we run a documentation processor such as doxygen on our source code, it processes the doc comments based on some style sheet, and it converts it into documentation. And this can be in a variety of formats. These documentation processors are highly configurable through style sheets, command line options, and configuration files. But here we'll be running doxygen using its default settings. And so as you can see in the doc comment, there is a description of this class here. Usually the first sentence is regarded as a summary, and it's processed and handled differently depending on the style sheet. Sometimes you'll just see the summary for certain things. And then the subsequent sentences tend to give more detail and be more specific. We can use HTML in these descriptions for formatting the text. Doc comments also contain tags. Tags start with the @ symbol. So here's an example of the author tag. It simply documents the author, the person who wrote the class. In this case, it's me. You can have multiple author tags if you have multiple people developing a class. Here's the version tag. As you know, software comes in versions. We develop versions. This just documents the version, and then also I've included the date that I produced that version. The doc comment should appear directly above the class it documents. This is our definition of the bike class. You can also use doc comments to document the members of the class. And these comments are usually simple one-line description. Here I've just documented the ID, the name, and the number of gears. Now keep in mind that this is a simple example. These comments may seem redundant, but you also have to keep in mind that the person reading this documentation won't have the benefit of looking at your code. And we'll see an example of that once we actually generate our documentation. So now if we look at method comments in my .cc file, again we have the / that denotes this as being a document comment. And then this is just how I document my default constructor. It says what it does. Here's my summary, but then it also indicates what the default values are for the members. And this comment should appear directly above the method that it documents. A little bit more interesting is the comment for my explicit constructor. Here's the header, and as you can see, it takes 3 parameters: ID, string, name, or ID, name, and gears, and it throws an invalid argument exception if any of these values is out of range or is invalid. So again, we start off with a description of the method, tells what it does. And for method comments, I use a different set of tags. Here I have the param tag. This documents the parameter. We have a parameter tag for each parameter the method takes. In this case, ID, name, and gears. The format is to give the tag, the name of the parameter it corresponds to, and then a brief description about that parameter. In this case, the explicit constructor throws an invalid argument exception, and we use the throw tag to document exceptions. We follow that tag with the name of the exception it throws, and then again some brief description about why the method might throw some exception. In this case, this is a pretty vague description. We could get into more details, and the set methods could also be a little bit more explicit about what, why exceptions are thrown. If a method throws multiple exceptions, then we use a throw tag to document each exception. So now if we scroll down, you can see that I have a set method, and all this does is just sets the bike's ID, and then I give a little bit more information about some of the requirements for IDs. It takes one argument, and I document that with a param tag. If the argument is not correct, then it throws invalid argument, and I document that with a throw tag. So now if we scroll down and take a look at a get method that I've implemented, this is just a simple get method that returns the ID of the bike. Here, however, I'm using a return tag, so that's the third type of tag that we use for method comments. And it doesn't have an identifier, so the format is a little different, but you just simply say the return tag and then a brief description about what the method returns. Notice that it takes the getID method takes no arguments, so there is no param tag. It doesn't throw any exceptions, so there is no throws tag. Also notice, if we go back up to set gears, notice that the set gears method has a void return type, and I did not include a return tag for its dot comment. So we only use return tags for methods that actually return some value. Finally, the read method. I'll scroll down. Just another example. Just indicates that this method reads the bike's ID, name, and gears, storing them in respective data members. I document the parameter with the param tag, and it throws an invalid argument, and so I document that with a throw tag. Has a void return type, so there is no return tag. So just to recap, we use a param tag for each parameter the method takes. We use a throw tag for each exception the method throws, and we use a return tag only if the method returns a value. There are other tags, such as a link tag and a C tag, and you can find information about that online. But we've covered the ones that we'll use most. We'll use author and version for class comments, and we'll use param, return, and throw for method comments. Let's go back to the command line, and these are all the files of my project. And I've written doc comments for all the classes and methods of the project. We're not going to go through those, but they look very much like the comments that you saw in the bike class. So now to generate documentation, I'm going to use the documentation processor called doxygen. And as I said, it's highly configurable, but we're just going to run it using its default settings. So to do so, from the command line, all I have to do is type doxygen star.h star.cc. And this gives doxygen all the .h files and all the .cc files for my project. So when you execute this command, you're going to see a lot of output. There could be errors if you've mistyped a doc comment or it doesn't match the method it's documenting. Doxygen will tell you. You can also see that we got a warning, and I'm getting this warning simply because I didn't have a documentation comment for the member capacity, which is in the delivery class. If you look in the directory, we see two new subdirectories, HTML and LaTeX. Let's go into the LaTeX directory first. LaTeX is a document markup language and a processing system. It's widely used for technical and academic publications. If we look at the files in this directory, the .tex extension identifies a file as a LaTeX file. EPS is encapsulated PostScript. This is an image of some sort. And they've converted it into PDF. We also see that in this directory you have a make file, and anytime we have a make file, we probably need to run make. So let's do that. And again, we get a lot of output. And what's happening is LaTeX is processing the LaTeX source and producing a PDF document. So if we do an ls, we see a new file in the directory called refman PDF. Refman is short for reference manual, and of course PDF is the format of the file. Now at this point, we could transfer this file back to our laptop, open it up in a PDF viewer like Acrobat Reader. But later on, what we'll do is we'll post this PDF to our simple website and we'll look at it in a browser. So now let's take a look at the HTML directory. And these are all your HTML files. This is an image file. The important file in this directory is index.html. So index.html is the main page for a website or for a directory of a website. So when a web server receives a request for a directory, by default it serves the file named index.html. So again, we could copy all these files back over to our laptop, and we could open index.html with our browser, and you could browse through all of this documentation. But instead, what we're going to do is we're going to create a simple website, and we're going to post our documentation. So let's go back up to our top level directory, and I can do that just by typing cd. Now, when a web server receives a request from someone using a browser, it retrieves and serves files from a standard set of directories. And so if the request is for a user directory like mine, MaloofM, then the web server we're using assumes that the name of the directory for the website is public_HTML. So we need to create this directory. So again, here are my files, and I'm going to create public_HTML. Now, in order for the web server to access this directory and its contents, we must set the correct permissions to give it permission to do so. In Unix, we use the change mode command to set the privileges for directories and files. Now, the first thing we need to do is set the privileges for our home directory. So to get to our home directory, we go up one level, up to the parent directory. And if we look at our present working directory, we see that we're in /home. So this is where all the users of the system have their home directories. And there are quite a few in here, so I'm not going to list them all. But if I do a long listing and then use grep to search for my username, then I'll see only my directory. So the important thing here are the characters on the left-hand side. The leftmost character indicates whether the file is a directory or not. In this case, this is a directory, and that's why we see the character D. If it were a normal file, you would just see a dash there. And as we're going through, you can look for examples of that. The next 9 characters indicate the permissions for this directory. And in Unix, there are 3 categories of permissions. There are user permissions, group permissions, and permissions for others. And for each category, there are three types. There's read, write, and execute. The first three characters here correspond to the user permissions. And as you can see, the user has read, write, and execute privilege. We're using X for execute. The next three characters correspond to the group permissions. And then the last three characters correspond to the permissions for others, or other permissions. And in this case, there are none. And we can see that from the dashes. For group, anyone in the group has read and execute privilege on this directory. Now the strings here, so this is malufim, this is the user or the owner of the directory. For a web browser to access the files of our website, we have to grant the web server read and execute permissions. And the web server is not the user, and it's also not in the group. So we have to give it, so its permissions are governed by the permissions for others. So to set them, I use change mode or chmod. And for the owner, I want to add or grant, using the plus symbol, read and execute permissions for the directory malufin. And now if I look at my directory again, you'll see that I've set the read and execute permissions for that directory. So I need to go back to my top level, back to my home directory. So here I am in my home directory. And I need to look at the permissions for public HTML. In order for the web server to access files in public HTML, we have to also set read and execute privileges for it. We do that using the same command. We're going to add read and execute privileges for others for the directory public HTML. And you can see that I've set the permissions. So now let's descend into the public HTML directory, and of course it's empty. And so this is where we would put the files of our website. And I need to create an index.html file here. I've already created one. It's in the directory that I use for the class, so I can just copy it over. It's called index.html, and I want to copy it into the current directory. If I look at its permissions, notice that there's no access for others. So I have to add read permission for this file for others. And again, I use change mod. And this lets the web server have access to that file. Now, it's important to note that in doing this, I've given everyone on CS class, and indeed everyone on the internet, access to this directory and file. So the specific file privileges of the things in this directory still matter, but it's a very good rule to follow that you shouldn't put anything in this directory that you don't want other people accessing. So let's take a look at index.html, and this is certainly not meant to be a tutorial on HTML, but HTML is just a markup language, and we use tags. A tag is anything in between two angle brackets, and we use these tags to identify elements such as the title and links, and we also use it for formatting, for boldface, for italics type, and things like that. Tags start, some tags start and then they end. Here we have HTML, and then the end, the closing tag for that is /HTML. Here's the body of our web page. If we look at the title text is just COSC 052. Then I've got a string hello. This actually starts a new paragraph, and this is a link. And the link consists of something I'm linking to. In this case, it's the P2 docs directory. I haven't created that yet. And then I have the link text, and this is what you'll actually see displayed on the website. So now at this point, I should be able to use my browser to go to that location, and it will display that page. So I want to go to http:// and the name of the machine is cs-class.uis.georgetown.edu, and the way that I specify my user directory is tilde and then the username, Maloofian. And so you can see that it served the page. Here's the title text. It's also the text it uses for the tab. Here's the hello string, and here's my link. If you look down at the bottom of the page, you can see that it is a link to a directory, p2.docs. Now when I click on this link, it's going to tell me that it was not found, the directory doesn't exist, I haven't given it the correct permissions. Let's go back to here, and now we can fix that. And the way that we're going to fix it is by creating a directory called p2.doc, and I'm going to copy the HTML documentation that Doxygen generated into that directory. So I create the directory p2docs, and now I can descend into that directory. It's empty. This is where I want to put all the HTML documentation. I can do that by copying from my top level in the directory p2, in the directory HTML, all of the files, which is what the star gives me. And I want to copy it to the current directory. Now, this is not quite right. This will just copy the files in the HTML directory. I actually want to copy the entire directory structure. If you notice, there was a subdirectory called search. I want to make sure that I copy all subdirectories and their files. And I can achieve this by using the -R command line switch. -R just gives me a recursive copy. So this is going to copy the entire directory structure under the directory HTML. So now if I run that, you'll see that I've copied these files. You'll see that I have a search directory, and there are files in the search directory too. Now if we go back up here and we look at the permissions, notice that there's no read permission for other. And for our directory here, there's no read and execute permission for others. So we need to set those permissions so the web server can have access to those files and directories. Now if we just did it individually, that would be a lot of typing. Fortunately, there's a way that we can set the permissions for an entire directory structure. So here I have p2docs. I'm in the directory public_HTML. And what I want to do is I want to set the permissions for others for that entire directory structure. So change mode has a recursive option just like copy does. So I'm going to use that. That will let me set permissions of the entire directory structure. And I want for others to add read and execute permission for the directory p2docs. This is not quite right. So I want to give execute permission for the directories, but not all of the individual files. Lowercase x grants execute permission to everything, but if I use capital X, then that grants execute permission only to the directories and not to the individual files. So now if I do a long listing, you notice that the p2docs has read and execute permission. If I descend into p2docs, you'll notice that all of my files have read permission for others, and the directory, the search directory, has read and execute permission. If I descend into search, all of its files have read permission. So let me just change directories again. So now, with all the directories set, all the files in place, I should be able to go back, and now this link should be active. And so this is the documentation, or the HTML documentation that Doxygen produced. I've got tabs here. I can look at the classes of the project. If I click on bike, then I get an inheritance diagram or a class diagram. I have a listing of the public interface. It tells me what the protected attributes are. And then I get the detailed description. This is how Doxygen rendered the comments that I wrote in my doc comments. Here's the description. This is how it processes the parameter tags, the exception tag, and so on and so forth. Here are my the get ID method that we talked about, the read method that we talked about, and then also it gives you the header file that it extracted the comments from. Notice that it also removed the comments, and this is all clickable documentation too. Now that I've posted the HTML documentation, I want to go back and make the PDF version of the documentation available through my website. So here I am in my public HTML directory. I'm going to copy over that reference manual, and I can do that by copying from my top level in P2 in LaTeX the file refman.pdf, and I want to copy it to my current directory. So now I have this new file. If I look at its permissions, notice that there's no read permission for others. So I can add that permission by using change mode, adding read permission for others, and then the name of the file. So now I've set the permissions so the web server can have access to that file. Now what I need to do is create a link in my HTML file so that we can access it through the browser. Just going to use a line break here. I'm going to create a new link to the file refman.pdf, and the link text is simply P2 documentation in PDF. And then I close the link tag, and that's it. So if I go back to my web browser and I refresh the page, now I see the new link. If you look down at the bottom, you can see that the URL refers to that file. If I click it, then I can see the reference manual that Doxygen generated. Same content as the HTML pages. This looks more like a document. These are all hyperlinks. I can click through this. Here's my class hierarchy. It gives me clickable page numbers. And finally, if I scroll down here, I'll just go ahead and jump to the bike class. Again, I get my inheritance diagram, my class diagram, I get my public interface, and then scrolling on down, I get detailed descriptions of the class, the author, the version tag are displayed here, and then on down you can see the documentation of my explicit constructor and all the other methods that I documented. So you can certainly leave your web page up if you want to take it down. There are two ways to do that. So here I am in the top level, in my top level directory. One thing I can do is I can simply remove that entire directory structure. I can simply use the recursive option for remove that directory, and it will remove the directory, the files, and any subdirectories in their files. Now you want to be very careful when you're using the -R command, because you could delete a lot of stuff unintentionally. I'm actually not going to do this. The other thing you can do is you can just set the permissions so the web server no longer has access to that directory. So one thing I can do is I can remove read and execute access from this directory, and just to be safe, all the files and directories in it. And so I can do that using change mode. I need to do this recursively. And for others, instead of adding permissions, I am going to remove permissions with the minus sign. And the permissions I want to remove are read and execute. And I want to do that for the directory public_HTML. So now if I look at the permissions, notice that they are gone. If I descend into the public directory and look at the permissions of the files, notice that they're all off. And this is true for the entire directory structure. So now if I go back to my web page or my browser and I try to look at my web page, I'm going to refresh it, and now it tells me that access is forbidden. I don't have permission to access that directory on the server. So just to recap, we looked at how to create documentation comments, how to write those in our source code, and we looked at how to use a documentation processor to extract the doc comments and produce documentation in PDF and HTML format. And we also looked at how to create a simple website where we can post this information.